Yeah, I have to say, actually, I recently met with my local senior forum in Carshalton and Wallington, and one of the most pressing points for them was actually taking part in consultations. They felt that they couldn't take part in that, so thank you for raising it. And Helen, to what extent, in terms of the causes of digital exclusion, or why people are digitally excluded, to what extent is that the design of the online space itself? So whether or not an app is user-friendly, easy to use, or a website is easy to navigate, and how much of that actually has to do with confidence in being on the online space, full stop?
So it's both.
Right.
So we need to see more kind of user-centred design and more design that works with older people about what works. I mean, even some of the language that's used, if you're not familiar with it, it can be very off-putting. So sometimes it's the language that's used and the design. And even on websites, which have been around for a long, long time now, but not all websites are as accessible as they should be, for example. Not all websites really think about how you might approach those if you have a visual impairment or some cognitive impairment. There is also, as you suggest, an issue about people's concern about going online. So safety and security, because of issues of scams and fraud, is a concern. Affordability is a massive reason why people are not online. So we've seen that some people have been online, have now gone offline, have lapsed, and that's a question of affordability, and that, of course, impacts on older people, but not just older people. And then for some people, it's a choice. It's actually a decision that people have made that they don't want to go online, and that's been their choice.
Yeah, thank you for that, Helena. Caroline, I wonder if I can come to you next, and sticking with the same theme on digital exclusion, thinking particularly here about access to services, primarily council-run services. Are there services that you think should always have an offline option, at least for the foreseeable future? Or are there any that you can envisage where you think, actually, this service could become 100% digital if it wanted to?
I think any service that's likely to be used by an older person needs to have an offline accessible alternative. And, you know, we've done quite a lot of research about this at Age UK. We've looked particularly at things like the provision of blue badges. For example, obviously older people are more likely to need a blue badge. Very often councils have moved to a digital by default sort of approach, largely I think for financial reasons. And in lots of cases, in theory, there is a good offline alternative, but it's not publicised. The people who are on the phone line, if you can ever find the number for your council, don't necessarily know about it. Or they might be great and they might be really good at directing you towards it. Or they might just say, go and talk to your local Age UK and they'll help do it for you, brackets, without either telling us or giving us any money to do it. So it's very, very mixed. But I think that's why we think at Age UK there's definitely scope for national guidance from government that actually sets minimum standards for what's acceptable in terms of public services. We have also been looking at the legal position around all this, and I think our view is that, again, something we mentioned earlier on, that the legal rights of older people in this space under the public sector equality duty are not always well understood. And actually there probably is a case for indirect discrimination in some cases, which is just not being taken. So, you know, there needs to be more awareness about that as well.
Well, absolutely, because I saw my own council was in the news last summer because they have started charging people more money to pay in cash to park their cars rather than digital. Whilst there is technically a phone number, you'd be hard-pressed to find that phone number advertised in the car park. So, and I wonder if I can move on to another concern that comes up a lot, I'm sure in all of our inboxes from constituents, which is accessing health and social care through the digital space. So a lot of GPs post-pandemic, for example, now have moved to online booking systems and whatnot. And I get a lot of complaints, I'm sure we all do, from people who are struggling to book appointments online and not having an alternative. Could you tell me a bit more, have you done any work to understand how widespread this problem is? But also what best practice should look like in terms of balancing the need, again, understand it maybe from a cost perspective, but the need to increase digital, but also make sure we're not locking people out at the same time.
I'd say it's one of the things we hear most about from older people at the moment. We haven't published it yet. We've just done a survey of 17,000 older people about their health and care over the winter, and concern about accessing your GP comes really high up the list for an awful lot of people, and it has done over the last few months and over the last couple of years, really, at the beginning with the pandemic, and this shift towards using more digital mechanisms for getting in touch. Absolutely right. Some people are doing a much better job on this than others, and I think again, really, we should be using digital technology to expand people's choice, not limit it. So I might choose to use the app on my phone, and it might be really convenient for me, but I don't like the thought that some older person who's not online is being disadvantaged as a result of that. So that, again, is partly about training, and it's about offering lots of choice so that somebody can actually, if they're an older person, maybe they're hard of hearing, so even that's not going to really work for them, so that they can still go into a surgery and be able to make an appointment that way if they prefer, or that there is help for them on the phone, and that the people are well trained so that they talk slowly and that they're very patient. I heard a story the other day about someone in their 90s who was ringing up to try and get an appointment for their husband who had dementia. She held the phone for 50 minutes and then her hand became tired and she dropped it before she'd actually got through. So, her local Age UK sorted that out for her. But I'm afraid there are instances of that. And we also, to our concern, hear about some older people who just give up and just have decided not to even try because it's just too difficult. So we're not in the right place on this nationally at the moment. We could be, but we need to do quite a lot more work to get there, I think.
Thank you very much. And Carol and Joanna, I realise I've not come to you on, but wonder if I can just ask if there's anything that you wanted to add on this topic of digital exclusion.
I haven't got much to add in terms of the experience that Helena and Caroline have mentioned. What I would like to add, first of all, is I agree completely. There should be time transition, and it's about also, again, it's about voice. It's about where are older people in the decisions about these sorts of changes. I would also question the design, and it comes back to workforce for me too. Is the workforce diverse that is coming up with the solutions that are now being implemented digitally, and have all protected characteristics being considered? And I think it does come back to some of these issues again about ignoring, omitting, and then unwittingly, maybe, if I'm kind, discriminating against certain people. And again, it's not just older people, it's people with disabilities. So the kind of impact assessment of these changes is insufficiently informed by voice, I think, would be the kind of big thing I would want to add to that.
Thank you, Carol. And Joanna?
Yeah, thanks. I just had one thing to add, actually, to what Helena said about barriers to getting people online, the affordability one, because we did a survey last year. So about 48% of the people we surveyed said they'd struggled to keep up with their broadband. These are people over 65, struggled to keep up with their payments. 30% were having to cut back on spending on internet, phones and so on. And 9% had cancelled their internet or phone services over the winter months to save money. So that clearly is a concern. And yet, the major broadband providers in the UK do offer social tariffs, and most of them have pension credit eligibility, but nobody knows about them. So I think there is a job for us all to do there. And I think there's also a job for government to do, which is about looking at the consistency of those social tariffs, because they cover different costs, different amounts, different speeds, and actually if they were comparable, it would be much easier for an older person to say, yeah, I want to, and now you've told me about it, I want to take that up and use it. So I think that there probably is a job for us to do, and just along the lines that Helena did in Wales in terms of making sure that people knew what the issues were. I think, again, an older person's commissioner could help us with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.